Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board.
That doesn't mean every item entering the U.S. is facing a 1.4% tariff. There's a huge range.
You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country.
Some items aren't taxed at all, while others, like shoes, are taxed at around 11%. And upping that 11% to something like 25 or 30% can cost the makers of these products a lot, especially when you consider that 98% of shoes sold in the US are made overseas.
Because of the low quality of American education system, we are so uneducated that the American public and the electorate as a whole do not know when Donald Trump has admitted directly on national TV to around 65 million people that his policies are responsible for today's inflation.
When tariffs are put into effect, the person likely paying for that increase in cost is you and I.
A number of American companies have said increased tariffs will hurt their businesses, and ultimately they'll have to increase prices for consumers.
As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China.
So how do tariffs work and what do they mean for the economy?
A tariff is a tax on items entering or leaving a country. The money collected under a tariff is called a duty.
I think the fact that Donald Trump has proven his incompetence by not knowing exactly how tariffs work is an example of white incompetency being placed in positions that they should not be in.
And in the United States, those duties are collected by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Last year, U.S. import duties totaled up to $33.1 billion. That's 1.4% of the total value of all imported goods.
Just because they are white or born into certain positions. If you did the minimum amount of research, then you will understand that tariffs are placed on products after they are imported. The company.
We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation.
But just exposed to what the population is because say things like this to distract them from the fact that he implemented an inflationary policy that will directly affect their pockets. But because it takes a while for a law once passed to work its way into the system and has an effect, he thinks that you are not smart enough to hold him accountable for your current inflation.
In the weeks following Trump's announcement, prices went up on items ranging from a can of Coke to toilet paper and kitchen towels. And some companies like Kimberly-Clark, which makes Huggies and Kleenex, have even lowered their annual forecast. And
that tariffs are placed on products after they are imported. The company in the country buying the import has to pay a extra fee in order to make the foreign country products more expensive to your market so that you can allow your products to be more affordable to your own home-based market. Therefore, tariffs are automatically an inflationary policy.
Let's say I'm buying watches from China to sell at big box retail stores here in the US.
Say each watch costs me $10. Add in a 20% tariff to that, and I now have to pay $12 per watch. $2 doesn't sound like much, but if my order is 15,000 watches, my total cost has now gone from $150,000 to $180,000.
That 20% tariffs on watches cost me an unexpected $30,000 on goods.
And the fact that you get people who can't understand this basic concept, or who don't have the basic common sense to go look up how tariffs are paid, shows you the dumbing down of America is threatening to our democracy.
And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration.
Not a Biden supporter, but the reason why they was unable to cut the Trump tariffs once they got in office is because they was dependent on that revenue source due to the fact that Trump had created a tax cut that lowered America's revenues and increased the deficit.
President Harris, I do want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America.
Time for Money, Power, Politics. And today we're going to take a closer look at the soaring U.S. deficit, falling revenues thanks to GOP tax cuts and increased spending that is pushing the country deeper into debt. The federal budget deficit increased by $113 billion during fiscal year 2018, a 17% increase over 2017, bringing the deficit to $779 billion. What does that?
Because we don't understand how the trillions of dollars in tax cut that Donald Trump gave to the rich added to American deficit, we don't understand that they had to substitute the rich taxes with the American consumer paying a tax through tariffs. This is where Trump is admitting that his prior policies are the cause of current inflations, and that his tax cuts has America in such a financial bind that Biden and Harris cannot afford to lift those inflationary tariffs because the income is needed in order to keep America afloat due to the Trump tax cuts for the rich.
So if tariffs cost businesses so much money, why have them in the first place?
Well, there's two main reasons. First, they raise money. That revenue goes to the general fund of the U.S. Treasury, which helps pay for running the government. Last year, the U.S. collected almost $35 billion in duties.
Now, we all know that businesses transfer their additional expenses over to their customers. This is why we're dealing with mass inflation. So you can see that how tariffs transfer over into a sales tax on the consumer. So you can see how Donald Trump has lied by saying these policies are not directly responsible for inflation.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people.
They come up with a massive tax cut, which disproportionately goes to corporate America and the upper 1% of the American people, and then argue the only way to solve it is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. No, this is not a spending problem. It is a revenue problem. We cut taxes during a period of economic growth, and we did not share it with all the American people. That's how we got here, and that's the only way we're going to get out of it is reversing it.
Hey, look, corporate taxes were down $92 billion, but individual taxes were up $96 billion, even with the tax cuts. And even
I don't know if you heard what she said and then what the commentator who is in support of Donald Trump said about taxes. What the supporter of Donald Trump said was supporting what Kamala Harris said. Kamala Harris said that Trump would do a tax cut for the rich, and he has no plan for the American people. What the commentator said, who is in support of the Donald Trump tax cut, said corporate taxes decreased, but individual taxes increased after the Trump tax cuts. I don't know if you're listening to what was said. He said corporate taxes decreased, personal taxes increased under the Donald Trump tax cut.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people.
They've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
To put this in perspective, the country's headed for a 100% of GDP level of debt, $1 trillion a year. The last time the United States had that level of debt to GDP, we were completing the Manhattan Project, invading Normandy and invading Okinawa, getting ready to invade Japan. We are now to 100% of GDP headed there in peace, relative peace, and times of prosperity.
I think we first, in order to comprehend what he is saying, must understand what the GDP is. The GDP is the gross domestic product. That is all of the products that America produces annually. He's saying under Donald Trump, the debt or the deficit have rose to a level that we would be indebted for everything that we produce in the United States as a whole. That is the equivalence of owing out the full value of your house, your paycheck for the year, your car value. That is the equivalence.
It is completely irresponsible. We are borrowing from the American future. We've become a nation that is not, a generation that cannot be trusted to protect the American future because we're addicted to our own consumption.
It's not just China that Trump has been after.
When the U.S. president introduced billions of dollars in new tariffs, countries like Canada and Mexico, as well as the European Union, were quick to react and retaliate. So why is he kicking up the controversy with America's biggest allies? Trump says he wants to dramatically reduce the U.S.'s trade deficit with other countries. A trade deficit is the amount by which a country's imports exceed the value of its exports. Trump is hoping that by introducing drastic tariffs, it will reduce the size of the U.S.'s trade deficit, and he's particularly focused on China. The U.S.-China trade deficit is estimated to be $370 billion. He hopes to reduce it to $200 billion by 2020. So what does all this mean for the consumer? Tariffs could badly hurt Chinese companies and their products too. Some of the largest items that the U.S. is shipping to China include things like soybeans, aircraft, and electrical machinery. So when China retaliated by announcing a 25% tariff on U.S.-made airplanes, that was a direct hit to Boeing, and the company's stock price fell on the news. Boeing is selling planes to China Southern Airlines Group, which plans to buy more than 300 aircraft in the next 3 years. So with higher tariffs on U.S. planes, it could buy a larger share of airplanes from, say, France's Airbus instead.
The vast majority of economists surveyed by a Reuters poll said that import tariffs would do more harm to the U.S. economy than good. Yet, like most things with President Trump, he's standing his ground as governments, companies, and consumers scramble to see what's next. Hey guys, it's Upton. Thanks for watching. Check out more of our videos here and here. We're also taking suggestions for
one of the most successful administrations in generations.
Baldwin's $1.2 trillion Inflation Reduction Act drove inflation higher, costing Wisconsin families $1,000 more per month if Tammy Baldwin